Hello and welcome. I'm Matsuma Katauga and you're watching the China Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. The death toll from the high-rise apartment complex fire in Hong Kong has now risen to 94 people, with 76 injured as rescuers launched full-scale operations across 7 burned buildings, as early investigations indicated the use of non-compliant, highly flammable materials. China has warned that the Taiwan issue is an internal affair after a report claimed U.S. President Donald Trump urged Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi to temper her tone on Taiwan, a claim Tokyo firmly denied, as Japan dismissed the Wall Street Journal report from yesterday as false. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen will not be joining French President Emmanuel Macron on his upcoming 3-day visit to China next week, marking a break from recent EU-China diplomatic tradition, as Macron will hold bilateral talks alone with Xi on the future of EU-China relations and will later brief EU partners on the outcome. Canada plans to advance ties with China at a rapid pace, said Ambassador Jennifer May, confirming Prime Minister Mark Carney has accepted Beijing's invitation for a future visit. Officials from both sides said last month's leaders' meeting turned a turning point. Taiwan's leader William Lai faces criticism after suggesting Beijing could complete unification by force by the year 2027. With opponents accusing him of stoking fear and pushing Taiwan towards a wartime footing without consensus. His office has later claimed the 2027 date was only a U.S. source capability benchmark amid heightening tensions. China's defense spokesperson Jiang Bin has stated that the Hawaii meetings of the China-US MMCA held in November has added positivity and stability to bilateral military ties based on equality, mutual respect, and peaceful coexistence. Beijing said the talks improved communication to reduce misunderstandings and miscalculation as well as risks. China has released a new white paper on arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation, stating that Beijing is a builder of world peace and a key promoter of global security governance in areas including outer space, cyberspace, and artificial intelligence. The document calls on all nations to work together to safeguard global peace and security. IMO Secretary General Arsenio Dominguez has said that China has a big role in global maritime cooperation. He further added that China's new permanent mission to the 176-member IMO reinforces its commitment to decarbonization, safety, and seafarer training in the global shipping sector. Now we start with the headlines of Hong Kong. Authorities have reported that the death toll from the city's worst fire in decades has now risen to at least 94 people. With several hundred still missing, the blaze, which engulfed a high-rise complex in the northern district of Tai Po, has almost been extinguished after raging for more than 24 hours. At least 76 people were injured, including 11 firefighters. Officials have opened an investigation into the cause of fire, focusing on renovation work at the site, which included bamboo scaffolding and plastic mesh. 3 men have been arrested in connection with the incident. Residents described a chaotic scene, with no fire alarms heard and many having to go door to door to alert their neighbors. Key members of the firefighting team have provided updates on the efforts to contain the fire. Let's listen in.
Our firefighting operation is almost complete. Despite that, we are still carrying out firefighting operation to 4 individual units. and damping down to various units of the 7 blocks are still in progress, so as to prevent the debris and embers from flaring up. What's next is the search and rescue operation. We will conduct search and operation to the remaining 25 assistant corps, and at the same time, we will endeavor to effect forcible entry to all the units of the 7 blocks concerned, so as to ensure that there are no other possible casualties.
FSD has deployed 177 ambulances responding to scene. Till now, we have already handled 155 casualties. Among them, 79 casualties were confirmed fatalities at scene. We have sent all the rest of casualties to hospital. During the firefighting operation, we have 11 fire personnel injured. They are now all in stable condition. However, unfortunately, we have 1 fire personnel confirmed died in the fire operation.
Now we welcome Andrew K.P. Long. He's an independent Chinese strategist, joins us live from Hong Kong. Thank you very much, Andrew, for joining us again. Good to see you. Andrew, what more has happened, or what has come out of the ongoing investigation on this fire from Hong Kong ever since we last talked about this?
First of all, I think the Hong Kong people and the Hong Kong government remain very grateful for the international expression of support, including the Pope, including President Putin, of course, the China's presidency, and then there is a huge amount of civil society action trying to alleviate the grief and the difficulties of people affected. Now, as far as the investigations are concerned, first of all, the fire is now perfectly under control after so many hours of burning. But then the initial investigations revealed that there has been problematic areas surrounding the fire, particularly the use of inflammable material for the scaffolding that covered the building while the buildings were under renovation. And this scaffolding were found not to match standards, fire retardant standards. So there is a question of culpability on the part of the contractors, but also culpability on the part of the authorities overseeing these safety measures. But there is a huge amount of relief effort in the local NGOs and volunteers. Huge amounts of money has been donated, and various other materials delivered on the site, involving a lot of sort of individual volunteers, expressing as kind of solidarity amongst the people of Hong Kong.
Right. And, also we saw that 3 individuals were taken or are taken into questioning. Can you tell us more about this?
Well, of course, the people, the contractors who were responsible for installing this scaffolding, together with the use of the substandard materials, are primarily responsible. So they were quickly arrested by the police and charged with gross negligence and manslaughter. But then there are further investigations into what's behind these companies, so that computers and various files were seized and searched, and the whole thing is still under investigation. So there's one side of the picture. The other side of the picture is to, again, comprehensive review of similar scaffolding and materials used in other construction sites in Hong Kong. So that has already commenced and is in full swing. Thirdly, it's also reviewing the kind of safety standards, how that they're enforced, and the long-term consideration of replacing some of these methods, including this bamboo scaffolding with metal. But then on that one, on that question, there are similar other problems because the metal can be easily heated up to a very high level, and the bamboos themselves are very flexible. And then which has occurred show that the bamboos themselves were not the main cause of the fire, but rather the materials. So I think that these investigations and and um, and discussions are still carrying on between the government, the authorities, as well as the academia and experts, including those outside China. I mean, there are other institutions involved in looking into these materials and so on and so forth. So I think that this could be very helpful in preventing similar incidents happening either in Hong Kong or elsewhere around the
Yes,
world.
indeed, hopefully that helps. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Andrew K.P. Long for sharing that insight from Hong Kong. Thank you very much. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, moving the focus on to Taiwan. In Taiwan, opposition critics have accused Taiwanese leader William Lai Ching-te of stroking fear on the island with his suggestion that Beijing could be preparing to take Taiwan over by force by 2027. According to the opposition, Lai's attempt to justify a massive increase in defense spending was nudging Taiwan towards a wartime footing without consensus or clarity. Meanwhile, spokeswoman for Lai's office, Karen Kuo, insists that 2027 is not a confirmed invasion date, but a capability benchmark cited in U.S. congressional and think tank assessments. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Mr. Andrew K.P. Long. He's an independent Chinese strategist, joins us live from Hong Kong. Thank you very much, Andrew, for staying with us. Now, Andrew, looking at this, how justified or how common is it for leaders to cite foreign intelligence or think tank assessments, such as now U.S. evaluations of China's military timeline was suggested by Taiwanese leader? How is this seen?
Well, the 2027 kind of problem has been a very popular misconception, a very dangerous one, because it completely misunderstands what Beijing is trying to achieve. Of course, President Xi did mention 2027, but merely as a target day, whereby the People's Liberation Army, the Air Force, the Navy will be fully prepared to mount an undefeatable kind of deterrence against any possible declaration of independence, because any declaration of independence by Taiwan or other foreign forces helping towards that end would contravene the China Anti-Secession Act enacted by Beijing decades ago to prevent this possibility. So the 2027 is merely a target date to get the China's armed forces prepared against this eventuality. It's not by no means a target date for military action, because the preference has always been for peaceful unification, enshrined by 3 white papers on the subject issued by Beijing over the past 2 decades, the last coinciding with the provocative visit of Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan. Now, the unification, because most Taiwanese people do not support unification, nor do they want to declare independence because of these consequences. And then, of course, according to the latest survey in Taiwan, only coming out a couple of days ago, suggesting that as much as 52% of the Taiwanese do not want to defend Taiwan if push comes to the shove, but because they know that they can't possibly risk their lives for something which is not likely to happen. Now, but as far as Beijing is concerned, the Taiwan strategy, unification strategy, has been enunciated by President Xi a number of times. The preference is for peaceful unification. The deadline for that, because the situation cannot be allowed to carry on, otherwise the Taiwan would eventually drift towards a separation. So the deadline is 2049, which is the 100th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. But then the strategy is three-pronged. Firstly, military deterrence, as I've just explained, making sure that there are no efforts which dare to declare some sort of a formal independence. Secondly, economic and diplomatic pressure. Very few countries now recognize Taiwan as a separate country. Of course, Taiwan has always been part of China, dating back to the Ming Dynasty in the 13th century. And also, the United Nations now has recognized only the People's Republic of China, representing the whole China. And the One China policy has been always upheld by the United States under the Taiwan Relations Act, which continue authorizes the supply of arms for Taiwan to defend themselves. The so-called three communiques and the six assurances, saying that confirming that the United States does not have any position on the future of Taiwan, supports the solution through peaceful means, but of course opposes the use of military force to alter the status quo. Now, along in this kind of dynamics, the three-pronged strategy seems to be working. I mentioned the military deterrence. I mentioned the economic and diplomatic pressures, but also people-to-people exchanges as the people in both countries increasingly interact peacefully in terms of tourism on both sides. The mainlanders visiting Taiwan, the Taiwanese visiting China, and as many as 300,000 Taiwanese, together with members of the family, are already living and working on the mainland on their businesses. And there are more and more opportunities opening up on the mainland for Taiwanese young people. For example, in tourism,
Andrew.
in arts, in culture, cinemas, and restaurants. So I think that
Andrew.
this momentum is being sustained.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Andrew KP Long for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now moving on, French President Emmanuel Macron will be traveling to China next week without any accompanying European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, marking a significant break from recent tradition. Macron has included EU leaders in several previous meetings with Chinese President Xi Jinping, part of an effort to Europeanize his approach to Beijing. Von der Leyen has accompanied Macron during high-level engagements in Paris and Beijing last year. However, according to reports next week, there will be no EU leader present for any portion of Macron's two-stop, three-day tour of China. This will be organized as a strictly bilateral one. Reports also suggests that Macron will hold an important conversation with Chinese President Xi Jinping on the future of EU-China relations and will report back to his European partners afterwards. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Mr. Andrew KP Long. Thank you very much, Andrew, for staying with us. Now, Andrew, looking at this, looking at the history, Macron has always met Xi Jinping with a company, either German Chancellor, even Angela Merkel, and von der Leyen. Why do you think suddenly EU leader is not accompanying him this time?
Well, I think that both Europe and the main European countries are facing pressures on two major fronts. On the one hand, the American transatlantic alliance seems to have fractured, with the United States imposing heavy tariffs on its long traditional allies in Europe, including the UK and France and Germany. And then the American alliance seems to be much less reliable compared with before, including, of course, President Trump's unilateral action on solving the Ukraine war behind the Europeans' back, as it were, and coming up with a formula negotiated directly with President Putin behind the Europeans' back, and trying to force the Europeans to accept this deal. And of course, the Europeans want to push back, but on the other hand, they may have overestimated the capacity of doing so, because for years they have outsourced their defense to the United States, and then even for the UK, for example, the total number of tanks number less than 100, because they're spending all their money on improving their welfare. Rather than pushing up the defense. And then after so many years, and this American ally seems to be less reliable than they thought, and they cannot just switch overnight, then build up their own capabilities. So they're trying to recalibrate the relationship with Beijing, and trying to explore the China market a bit more. Not that they would embrace Beijing entirely, but that is a recalibration of the relationship. But on the other hand, the Ukraine problem is coming up close and personal, and President Trump has already imposed a deadline, forcing the European allies and Ukraine to accept the deal, which was secretly negotiated between him and President Putin. So I think that there are crises on both fronts, and hence the inability of all the leaders to go to China altogether. But on the other one hand, there is a definite movement towards recalibrating relations with China, both from France, Germany, and the other European countries, because of this trauma that they're now facing with their relationship and long-term reliance on the United States as a staunch partner, and that partnership seems to have fractured.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Andrew K.P. Long for joining us today as an independent Chinese strategist from Hong Kong. Thank you very much. Now we move on to China. China has announced a detailed strategy to better match the supply and demand of consumer goods as part of its latest effort to leverage its vast domestic market and support long-term economic growth. The plan, released by the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology along with 5 other government departments, outlines the measures to develop new consumption areas such as smart homes and green construction materials, boost the modernization of consumer goods in rural regions, and expand the supply of items including winter sports equipment, popular toys, and products for both infants and older adults. China will coordinate the expansion of domestic demand and the deepening of supply-side structural reform as per the plan, noting that consumption's rate of contribution to economic growth will increase steadily by 2030. Now for this discussion, we welcome Dr. Jayant Menon. He's a senior fellow at ISEAS. Joins us live from Singapore. Thank you very much, Doctor, for joining us. Welcome to NewsX World. Now, looking at this, how might China's strategy to boost domestic consumption, especially in emerging sectors, how do you think this would reshape the balance between state planning and market forces in its economy?
This move to rebalance the drivers of growth is not new. We've been here before when it comes to China in particular. The first attempt was soon after the global financial crisis of 2007-8, where these huge imbalances were first raised as a potential source of instability. And China announced then that it was hoping to rebalance its economy, and it has been trying to do so, but with limited success. But now things are quite different once again. The urgency is much greater. partly because the world now is turning somewhat inward with the rise in nationalism led by the US protectionism under President Trump. And so there is a greater need now to actually turn towards domestic sources of growth. Consumption growth is already around half of all growth as a contributor, but it needs to increase further. And the shift out of investment towards more consumption and less reliance on net exports is what is required, given the uncertain environment globally, and also China's wish to become more internally driven and therefore more resilient to these sorts of external pressures.
And Dr. Jayant, building on your answer, to what extent could China's emphasis on expanding domestic demand, how do you think this would reduce its dependence on export-driven growth, and how might this shift influence its global economic relationships with other countries?
Yeah, so there is concern now in many of China's trading partners that the closing of the US market or the rise in protectionism in the US will mean that China will be looking to their markets to replace a lot of the lost sales in the US market with its excess industrial capacity at home. And so there are concerns about so-called dumping, or even if it's not dumping, it's concern over flooding of cheaper imports to the region. This is not always bad. I mean, having access to cheap imports is not always a bad thing, but if there's domestic competing producers at home, then if goods are dumped, then they might lose market share in a way that pushes them out of business, employment may be lost, etc. So I think that's the concern in this region. So they would welcome, I think, this attempt again to rebalance the sources of economic growth in China, drawing away from net exports towards domestic consumption. Net exports has fluctuated quite a bit. It's fluctuated between 10 and 30% over recent years. Last year, it shot up, and that's where a lot of the concerns rose. Because as we know, China is having its own domestic growth issues with the softening of the property sector and so on. And also, its need to find new markets for its exports. So if net exports can go back towards something closer to 10 rather than 30, and consumption can pick up the excess, then I think a lot of the trading partners in the region will welcome that shift.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Dr. Jayant Menon for joining us today from Singapore and sharing that insight. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Korea. North Korea's state media suggests that South Korea's recent joint military drills with the United States are aimed at deterring North Korea. According to reports, the allies staged various exercises, including a naval drill in waters near the South Korean city of Pyeongtaek, where they mobilized weapons like a guided missile, destroyer, and anti-submarine helicopters. The U.S. has also deployed F-16 fighters at air bases in South Korea and Japan. Meanwhile, KCNA has also accused that it is the U.S. that is threatening the peace and stability and destroying the strategic security balance. This comes as earlier this week, South Korea proposed talks with North Korea to discuss drawing up a clear boundary along the military demarcation line to prevent armed clashes along the border. Now we move on to Indonesia. According to rescue officials, the death toll from massive floods and landslides on Indonesia's Sumatra island has now risen to 84 people. Authorities say torrential rains triggered deadly mudslides that swept through communities in North and West Sumatra. In North Sumatra alone, police report 62 people have died and 95 people are injured, and at least 65 people still stay missing as search teams work around the clock. In neighboring West Sumatra, officials confirm another 22 lives have been lost and 12 still are unaccounted for. Emergency crews are using dog teams, heavy machinery, and drones as they race against time to reach survivors in remote areas. And that's a wrap on the China Report. Keep watching News 6 World for more news updates from around the world.